Lieutenant Jake Morrison was having the worst week of his military career. The 26-year-old SEAL had been with Team 6 for just 8 months, but already the pressure was getting to him. His latest training evaluation had been mediocre. His team leader was questioning his decision-making under stress, and he was starting to wonder if he had what it took to succeed in the elite unit. Jake had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. Joining the Navy had been his ticket to a bigger world, and making it through SEAL training had been the proudest moment of his life. But now, surrounded by operators who seemed to have ice in their veins and steel in their spines, he was beginning to doubt himself. The training scenarios were becoming increasingly complex, and Jake found himself second-guessing every decision. When his team ran urban warfare simulations, he hesitated at crucial moments. When they practiced hostage rescue operations, his timing was off. His instructors kept telling him he was thinking too much, but he couldn't seem to turn off the voice in his head that questioned every move. On this particular Tuesday morning, Jake had just finished a particularly brutal training session. His team had failed their objective because of a tactical error he had made, and his teammates weren't shy about letting him know how they felt about it. The weight of their disappointment sat heavy on his shoulders as he walked through the building, still wearing his training gear and feeling like he might not belong here after all. He was heading to the locker room when he noticed Marcus, the custodian, mopping the floor near the entrance to the briefing rooms. Jake had seen the older man around the building many times, but had never really paid attention to him. Today, something made him look more carefully. Maybe it was the way Marcus moved with a purposeful efficiency that reminded Jake of his instructors. Maybe it was the way the man held himself, with a bearing that seemed military despite his civilian clothes. As Jake walked past, he caught a glimpse of something that made him stop in his tracks. When Marcus reached up to clean a high window, his uniform sleeve rode up slightly, revealing part of a tattoo on his forearm. It wasn't the tattoo itself that caught Jake's attention, but rather what he could see of it. The partial image looked distinctly military, with what appeared to be an eagle and some kind of insignia. Jake slowed his pace, trying to get a better look without being obvious about it. As Marcus continued his work, moving to clean another window, Jake could see more of the tattoo. His heart began to race as he recognized what he was seeing. The eagle was unmistakable, and below it were symbols that Jake knew well from his military history classes and the displays throughout the building. Unable to contain his curiosity, Jake found himself approaching the custodian. He wasn't sure what he was going to say or how he was going to ask about what he had seen. The older man looked up as Jake approached, his expression friendly but reserved. "Excuse me," Jake said, his voice slightly uncertain. "I couldn't help but notice your tattoo." Marcus paused in his cleaning, his expression becoming more guarded. He glanced down at his sleeve, which had ridden up again, revealing more of the intricate design. For a moment, neither man spoke. "It's just a tattoo," Marcus said quietly, beginning to roll down his sleeve. But Jake had seen enough to know it wasn't just any tattoo. The design was too specific, too detailed, and too meaningful to be something chosen casually. He had spent enough time studying military insignia and unit patches to recognize what he was looking at, even if he couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. "That's a trident," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And those are unit designations." Marcus stopped rolling down his sleeve and looked directly at Jake. The younger man could see something shift in the custodian's eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. It was the look of someone assessing a situation, measuring risks and options with the speed of experience. "Son," Marcus said carefully, "I think you might be mistaken." But Jake wasn't mistaken, and they both knew it. The trident tattoo was sacred among Navy SEALs, and the additional insignia he had glimpsed told a story that Jake was only beginning to understand. The design wasn't just marking someone who had been a SEAL, it was marking someone who had achieved ranks and positions that few ever reached. "I'm sorry," Jake said, suddenly feeling like he was intruding on something sacred. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just that I've never seen anything quite like that design before." Marcus studied the young SEAL for a long moment, taking in his training gear, his obvious youth, and the uncertainty that seemed to radiate from him. Jake shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, feeling like he was being evaluated by someone with far more experience than a building custodian should possess. "You're having a rough week," Marcus observed, and it wasn't a question. Jake was surprised by the accuracy of the statement and by the kindness in the older man's voice. "Is it that obvious?" "Sometimes," Marcus said, returning to his cleaning but moving more slowly now. "The young ones always think they have to carry the whole world on their shoulders." There was something in the way Marcus spoke that made Jake want to hear more. The custodian's voice carried an authority that seemed to come from experience, and his observation about Jake's struggles was too accurate to be casual. "You've been military," Jake said. And again, it wasn't really a question. Marcus smiled slightly. "Most people who work on base have some military background." It was a deflection, but a gentle one. Jake could sense that he was approaching the edge of something important, but he also sensed that pushing too hard would cause the older man to retreat entirely. Instead, he found himself talking about his own struggles. "I made a mistake in training today," Jake admitted. "Cost my team the exercise. I'm starting to think maybe I'm not cut out for this." Marcus stopped cleaning and looked at Jake directly. "What kind of mistake?" Without thinking, Jake found himself describing the training scenario in detail. He explained how his team had been tasked with clearing a building where hostages were being held, how he had hesitated when they encountered unexpected resistance, and how that hesitation had led to mission failure. As he talked, he noticed that Marcus listened with the kind of focused attention that Jake had only seen from his most experienced instructors. "Hesitation can be deadly," Marcus said when Jake finished. "But so can recklessness. The trick is learning to trust your training and your instincts." "Easy to say," Jake replied. "Harder to do when lives are on the line." Marcus was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but carried an unmistakable weight of experience. "Every operator goes through this," he said, "the moment when they realize that their decisions matter more than they ever imagined. It's not about being fearless, son. It's about being afraid and doing the job anyway." The way Marcus spoke made Jake listen more carefully. There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just offering general advice but speaking from personal experience. "Deep, hard-earned experience, how do you know?" Jake asked quietly. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was having the worst week of his military career. The 26-year-old SEAL had been with Team 6 for just 8 months, but already the pressure was getting to him. His latest training evaluation had been mediocre. His team leader was questioning his decision-making under stress, and he was starting to wonder if he had what it took to succeed in the elite unit. Jake had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. Joining the Navy had been his ticket to a bigger world, and making it through SEAL training had been the proudest moment of his life. But now, surrounded by operators who seemed to have ice in their veins and steel in their spines, he was beginning to doubt himself. The training scenarios were becoming increasingly complex, and Jake found himself second-guessing every decision. When his team ran urban warfare simulations, he hesitated at crucial moments. When they practiced hostage rescue operations, his timing was off. His instructors kept telling him he was thinking too much, but he couldn't seem to turn off the voice in his head that questioned every move. On this particular Tuesday morning, Jake had just finished a particularly brutal training session. His team had failed their objective because of a tactical error he had made, and his teammates weren't shy about letting him know how they felt about it. The weight of their disappointment sat heavy on his shoulders as he walked through the building, still wearing his training gear and feeling like he might not belong here after all. He was heading to the locker room when he noticed Marcus, the custodian, mopping the floor near the entrance to the briefing rooms. Jake had seen the older man around the building many times but had never really paid attention to him. Today, something made him look more carefully. Maybe it was the way Marcus moved, with a purposeful efficiency that reminded Jake of his instructors. Maybe it was the way the man held himself, with a bearing that seemed military despite his civilian clothes. As Jake walked past, he caught a glimpse of something that made him stop in his tracks. When Marcus reached up to clean a high window, his uniform sleeve rode up slightly, revealing part of a tattoo on his forearm. It wasn't the tattoo itself that caught Jake's attention, but rather what he could see of it. The partial image looked distinctly military, with what appeared to be an eagle and some kind of insignia. Jake slowed his pace, trying to get a better look without being obvious about it. As Marcus continued his work, moving to clean another window, Jake could see more of the tattoo. His heart began to race as he recognized what he was seeing. The eagle was unmistakable, and below it were symbols that Jake knew well from his military history classes and the displays throughout the building. Unable to contain his curiosity, Jake found himself approaching the custodian. He wasn't sure what he was going to say or how he was going to ask about what he had seen. The older man looked up as Jake approached, his expression friendly but reserved. "Excuse me," Jake said, his voice slightly uncertain. "I couldn't help but notice your tattoo." Marcus paused in his cleaning, his expression becoming more guarded. He glanced down at his sleeve, which had ridden up again, revealing more of the intricate design. For a moment, neither man spoke. "It's just a tattoo," Marcus said quietly, beginning to roll down his sleeve. But Jake had seen enough to know it wasn't just any tattoo. The design was too specific, too detailed, and too meaningful to be something chosen casually. He had spent enough time studying military insignia and unit patches to recognize what he was looking at, even if he couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. "That's a trident," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and those are unit designations." Marcus stopped rolling down his sleeve and looked directly at Jake. The younger man could see something shift in the custodian's eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. It was the look of someone assessing a situation, measuring risks and options with the speed of experience. "Son," Marcus said carefully, "I think you might be mistaken." But Jake wasn't mistaken, and they both knew it. The trident tattoo was sacred among Navy SEALs, and the additional insignia he had glimpsed told a story that Jake was only beginning to understand. The design wasn't just marking someone who had been a SEAL. It was marking someone who had achieved ranks and positions that few ever reached. "I'm sorry," Jake said, suddenly feeling like he was intruding on something sacred. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just that I've never seen anything quite like that design before." Marcus studied the young SEAL for a long moment, taking in his training gear, his obvious youth, and the uncertainty that seemed to radiate from him. Jake shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, feeling like he was being evaluated by someone with far more experience than a building custodian should possess. "You're having a rough week," Marcus observed, and it wasn't a question. Jake was surprised by the accuracy of the statement and by the kindness in the older man's voice. "Is it that obvious?" "Sometimes," Marcus said, returning to his cleaning but moving more slowly now. "The young ones always think they have to carry the whole world on their shoulders." There was something in the way Marcus spoke that made Jake want to hear more. The custodian's voice carried an authority that seemed to come from experience, and his observation about Jake's struggles was too accurate to be casual. "You've been military," Jake said. And again, it wasn't really a question. Marcus smiled slightly. "Most people who work on base have some military background." It was a deflection, but a gentle one. Jake could sense that he was approaching the edge of something important, but he also sensed that pushing too hard would cause the older man to retreat entirely. Instead, he found himself talking about his own struggles. "I made a mistake in training today," Jake admitted. "Cost my team the exercise. I'm starting to think maybe I'm not cut out for this." Marcus stopped cleaning and looked at Jake directly. "What kind of mistake?" Without thinking, Jake found himself describing the training scenario in detail. He explained how his team had been tasked with clearing a building where hostages were being held, how he had hesitated when they encountered unexpected resistance, and how that hesitation had led to mission failure. As he talked, he noticed that Marcus listened with the kind of focused attention that Jake had only seen from his most experienced instructors. "Hesitation can be deadly," Marcus said when Jake finished, "but so can recklessness. The trick is learning to trust your training and your instincts." "Easy to say," Jake replied. "Harder to do when lives are on the line." Marcus was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but carried an unmistakable weight of experience. "Every operator goes through this," he said, "the moment when they realize that their decisions matter more than they ever imagined. It's not about being fearless, son. It's about being afraid and doing the job anyway." The way Marcus spoke made Jake listen more carefully. There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just offering general advice, but speaking from personal experience. "Deep, hard-earned experience, how do you know?" Jake asked quietly. Marcus looked at the young SEAL for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. The question hung in the air between them, and Jake could sense he had crossed into territory that the older man rarely discussed. The bustling sounds of the military base continued around them, but in this small section of hallway, time seemed to slow down. "Experience teaches you things," Marcus finally said. his voice carrying a weight that made Jake pay even closer attention. Some lessons you learn in classrooms, others you learn when everything goes wrong and you have to find a way to make it right. Jake wanted to press further, but something in Marcus's expression warned him to be patient. Instead, he found himself sharing more about his own struggles. My team leader says I overthink things, but every time I'm in a scenario, all I can think about is what happens if I make the wrong choice. Marcus nodded slowly, as if remembering his own version of that same fear. What's your background, son? Where did you come from before you earned that trident? Small town, Ohio, Jake replied. My dad worked in a factory, Mom was a teacher. I was the first person in my family to join the military. No military tradition to live up to then, Marcus observed. That can be both a blessing and a curse. How so? Marcus leaned on his mop handle, his posture shifting slightly. Jake noticed that even this casual position looked somehow disciplined, like muscle memory from years of military bearing. When you don't have family members who've been through it, you don't carry their expectations or their fears. But you also don't have anyone who can tell you that what you're feeling is normal. The insight was too accurate, too specific to come from someone who had only observed military life from the outside. Jake felt his suspicions growing stronger, but he also felt a genuine connection forming with this man who seemed to understand exactly what he was going through. The mistake you made today, Marcus continued. Tell me more about it. What exactly happened when you hesitated? Jake found himself going into even greater detail than before. He described the layout of the training building, the positions of his teammates, the moment when they encountered the unexpected scenario that threw off their carefully rehearsed plan. As he talked, he noticed that Marcus asked very specific questions, the kind of tactical questions that demonstrated a deep understanding of special operations procedures. Your team was using a standard four-man entry formation? Marcus asked. Yes, sir, Jake replied, and then caught himself. The sir had slipped out naturally, but he wasn't sure why. Marcus was a custodian, not an officer. Yet something about the man's bearing and the way he asked questions made the respectful address feel appropriate. If Marcus noticed the sir, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he continued his questioning. And when you encountered resistance from an unexpected angle, what were your options? Jake thought back to the training scenario. We could have held position and called for backup. We could have adapted our entry point, or we could have pushed through with modified positions. What did your training tell you to do? Training said to adapt, trust the team, trust the preparation, and execute. But you hesitated, Marcus said, and it wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I started thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if we walked into an ambush? What if there were more hostiles than we expected? What if I led my team into a trap? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tone that Jake had never heard from him before. It was the voice of command, of someone who had faced these exact decisions in situations where the stakes were real. The what-ifs will paralyze you if you let them, Marcus said. In the field, hesitation kills. Not just you, but the people counting on you. You talk like you've been there, Jake said quietly. Another long pause. Around them, the normal activities of the base continued. Young sailors walked past, officers hurried to meetings, and the business of military life carried on. But in their small bubble of conversation, something significant was happening. I have been there, Marcus said simply. The admission hit Jake like a physical blow. He had suspected it, had seen the clues, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. Where? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then rolled up his sleeve fully for the first time. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he saw the complete tattoo. It wasn't just a trident, it was a trident surrounded by unit designations, combat ribbons represented in ink, and symbols that told the story of a career that spanned decades at the highest levels of special operations. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, places that don't appear on any official records, Marcus said quietly. 32 years of active duty. Retired as a Master Chief Special Warfare Operator. Jake felt his knees go weak. Master Chief was the highest enlisted rank a SEAL could achieve, and it wasn't given for time served. It was earned through exceptional leadership, unparalleled skill, and a career's worth of successful operations. The man mopping floors in front of him was military royalty, a legend among legends. Sir, Jake said, and this time the word carried the full weight of respect and recognition. I had no idea. That's the point, Marcus replied, rolling his sleeve back down. I took this job because I wanted to be useful without being responsible. I wanted to stay connected to this world without having to make the decisions that kept me awake at night for 3 decades. Jake struggled to process what he was learning. Why are you telling me this? Marcus studied the young SEAL's face, seeing something there that reminded him of his younger self. Because you're drowning in doubt, and doubt is more dangerous than enemy fire. I've seen too many good operators wash out not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked confidence in their training. But what if I make the wrong decision? You will, Marcus said bluntly. Every operator makes wrong decisions. The difference between the ones who survive and thrive and the ones who wash out is what they do after they make those mistakes. Jake found himself hanging on every word. This wasn't theoretical advice from a textbook or generic wisdom from an instructor. This was hard-earned knowledge from someone who had walked the path that Jake was just beginning. In Somalia, 1993, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a sacred trust, I made a decision that got 2 of my men wounded. For months afterward, I questioned everything. Wondered if I should step down, if I was fit for command. What happened? My commanding officer told me something I've never forgotten. He said that the moment you stop being afraid of making the wrong decision is the moment you become dangerous to your team. The fear keeps you sharp, keeps you careful, but it can't keep you from acting. Jake absorbed this, feeling something shift inside him. How do you find the balance? Marcus smiled for the first time since their conversation had turned serious. Trust your training, trust your team, and trust that you earned your place here for a reason. The instructors who put you through hell to get that trident don't give it to people who can't handle the responsibility. The wisdom was simple but profound, and Jake could feel its truth resonating in his chest. Here was someone who had faced the same fears, the same doubts, and had found a way through them. More than that, here was someone who had excelled at the highest levels of the profession Jake was struggling to master. Over the following days, Jake found himself looking for opportunities to encounter Marcus during his work routine. It wasn't stalking exactly, but he had developed a profound respect for the man and hungered for more of his insights. The brief conversation had already begun to change how Jake approached his training, and he wanted to learn everything he could from someone who had mastered the profession he was struggling to understand. Marcus seemed to sense Jake's increased attention, but didn't discourage it. When their paths crossed in the hallways, he would nod with a slight smile that suggested he understood what the young SEAL was going through. Sometimes Jake would find small notes tucked into his locker, simple pieces of advice written in Marcus's careful handwriting. Trust the process. Your team is your strength. Fear is information, not instruction. The notes were always unsigned, and Marcus never acknowledged leaving them, but Jake treasured each one. They came at exactly the moments when he needed them most, as if the older man had an uncanny ability to sense when doubt was creeping back into Jake's mind. Jake's performance in training began to improve gradually. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden, but his instructors noticed that he was moving with more confidence, making decisions more quickly, and trusting his instincts. His teammates started to see him as a reliable partner rather than a weak link. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. One afternoon, Jake was cleaning his gear after a particularly successful training exercise when Marcus appeared in the equipment room. The custodian was supposedly there to empty trash cans, but Jake suspected he had come specifically to check on him. Good exercise today? Marcus asked casually, working his way around the room with his cleaning supplies. Yeah, actually, Jake replied, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. We completed the objective with time to spare. My team leader said I made some solid tactical decisions. Marcus nodded approvingly. Confidence is contagious. When you trust yourself, your team trusts you too. Jake set down his equipment and looked directly at the older man. I owe that to you. The things you've told me, the way you've helped me understand what I was going through. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied. Helping the next generation is part of the job. Always has been. But you're not officially an instructor. You're not supposed to be mentoring anyone. Marcus paused in his work and gave Jake a look that was both amused and serious. Son, leadership doesn't stop when you retire. It just takes different forms. The comment sparked a question that Jake had been wanting to ask for days.
Why did you retire?
I mean, someone with your experience, your rank. You could have stayed in, moved up to officer positions, become an instructor officially. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression becoming more distant. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Jake had come to recognize as the sound of hard memories being shared. 32 years is a long time to carry that level of responsibility, Marcus said finally. By the end, I had sent more young men into danger than I could count. Most came home. Some didn't. After a while, the weight of those decisions, it changes you. Jake felt the gravity of what Marcus was sharing. You saved more lives than you lost, though. That has to count for something. It does, Marcus agreed. But the ones you lose stay with you. Their faces, their families, the knowledge that your decisions put them in harm's way. It accumulates over the years. Is that why you took this job? To get away from that responsibility? Marcus shook his head. Not to get away from it. To find a different way to serve. These young operators, he gestured toward the training areas, they need more than just technical training. They need wisdom, perspective, someone who's walked the path they're walking. I can provide that without having to send them into combat. Jake was beginning to understand the depth of Marcus's commitment to helping others, even in retirement. How many others have you helped? I mean, besides me? More than you might think, Marcus said with a slight smile. You'd be surprised how many conversations happen when an old custodian is around to listen. People assume you're invisible, so they let their guard down. Sometimes that's when they need guidance the most. The idea that Marcus had been quietly mentoring struggling SEALs for years without official recognition was both inspiring and humbling. Jake realized that he was part of an unofficial network of operators who had been touched by this man's wisdom. Don't you miss it, though? Jake asked. The action? The missions? Being at the center of important operations? Marcus considered the question carefully. I miss the brotherhood, the sense of purpose, the feeling that you're making a difference in the world. But I don't miss the sleepless nights, the constant pressure, or the knowledge that people you care about might not come home from the next mission. And this gives you the brotherhood without the pressure. In a way, Marcus nodded. I get to watch young warriors like you grow into their potential. I get to be part of their success without being responsible for their survival. It's a different kind of satisfaction, but it's real. Jake found himself thinking about his own future, wondering if he would someday face the same choice between continuing to serve in active operations or finding a different way to contribute. Do you ever regret the decision to retire? No, Marcus said without hesitation. I served my time at the tip of the spear. Now I serve in a different way. Both have value. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several other SEALs who needed access to the equipment room. As the younger operators filed in, Jake noticed how Marcus seamlessly transitioned back into his role as custodian, becoming nearly invisible as he continued his cleaning work. But Jake also noticed something else, the way Marcus observed the new arrivals, assessing their demeanor, their equipment, their interactions with each other. One of the SEALs, a newer recruit named Rodriguez, looked particularly stressed. Jake watched as Marcus made a point of working near Rodriguez's gear, creating an opportunity for casual conversation. Within minutes, Marcus had identified that Rodriguez was struggling with confidence issues similar to what Jake had experienced. Jake realized he was witnessing a master at work. Marcus had turned custodial work into an intelligence-gathering operation, using his position to identify SEALs who needed guidance, and then finding subtle ways to provide it. It was brilliant, and it was entirely in character for someone who had spent decades reading people and situations with deadly accuracy. As Jake prepared to leave, Marcus caught his attention with a subtle gesture. When the other SEALs were distracted with their gear, the older man approached Jake one more time. You're not the only one who's been struggling, Marcus said quietly, glancing toward Rodriguez. Keep an eye on the new guys. Sometimes peer guidance is more effective than advice from an old custodian. Jake understood. Marcus was expanding his role in the informal mentorship network, asking him to help identify and support other struggling operators. It was an honor and a responsibility that Jake didn't take lightly. I will, Jake promised. And sir, thank you for everything. Marcus smiled and returned to his cleaning, but Jake could see the satisfaction in his expression. The chain of mentorship was continuing, just as it had for generations of warriors. The only difference was that now it was being facilitated by a man who was supposed to be just cleaning floors. Word spread quietly through the SEAL community, as it always did when something significant happened. Not official word, not announcements or memos, but the kind of underground communication that had always existed among elite operators. Jake didn't spread Marcus's story directly, but his transformation from struggling operator to confident team member hadn't gone unnoticed by his peers. Other SEALs began to pay more attention to the quiet custodian who worked their building. They noticed the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to understand their world better than most civilians ever could. Some of them started looking more carefully at the man they had previously ignored, and a few began to spot the same signs that Jake had seen. Rodriguez was the first to approach Jake directly. The young SEAL had been having nightmares about an upcoming deployment, and his anxiety was affecting his performance during training. Jake found him sitting alone in the break room one evening, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Rough day?" Jake asked, settling into the chair across from Rodriguez. "Rough week, rough month," Rodriguez replied. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong over there. What if I freeze up? What if I make a mistake that gets someone killed?" Jake recognized the spiral of doubt that had once consumed his own thoughts. "Have you talked to anyone about it? Maybe someone with experience who could give you some perspective." Rodriguez shook his head. "The instructors just tell us to trust our training." "Easy for them to say." Jake glanced around to make sure they were alone, then leaned forward. "What if I told you there was someone here who had more experience than any of the instructors? Someone who had faced exactly what you're going through and found a way through it?" "Who are you talking about, Marcus?" "The custodian." Rodriguez looked confused. "The old guy who cleans the building? What could he possibly know about what we're going through?" Jake smiled, remembering his own initial skepticism. "More than you might think. Trust me on this one. Next time you see him working alone, strike up a conversation. Ask him about his thoughts on dealing with pre-deployment stress." Rodriguez remained skeptical, but desperation eventually overcame his doubts. 2 days later, he found Marcus cleaning the windows in the main corridor and worked up the courage to approach him. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough for Rodriguez to realize that Jake had been right. There was something different about this man, something that suggested depths of experience hidden beneath his humble exterior. Within a week, Rodriguez had sought out Marcus several more times, each conversation building on the last. The older man shared stories without revealing details, offered advice without seeming to lecture, and provided the kind of perspective that only came from years of facing the same fears that plagued younger operators. Word continued to spread, but carefully and quietly. The informal mentorship network that Marcus had created grew organically, with each SEAL who benefited from his guidance, eventually helping to identify others who might need similar support. It became an unspoken understanding among certain members of the team. If you were struggling, you could find wisdom in unlikely places. Commander Sarah Mitchell was the first officer to notice the pattern. As the commanding officer of one of the SEAL teams, she was responsible for monitoring the performance and well-being of her operators. Over the course of several months, she had observed a marked improvement in the confidence and performance of several previously struggling team members. Mitchell was a sharp officer who had earned her position through exceptional skill and keen observation. When multiple operators showed similar patterns of improvement, without any changes to official training programs, she began to investigate. Her inquiry was subtle but thorough, and it didn't take long for her to identify the common thread. All of the improved operators had spent time talking with Marcus Thompson, the building custodian. Her first instinct was to be concerned about unauthorized mentoring and potential security breaches. But as she dug deeper, she found no evidence of impropriety. Marcus maintained his security clearance, followed all protocols, and never discussed classified information. Instead, he seemed to be providing the kind of personal guidance and emotional support that was often missing from formal training programs. Mitchell decided to observe Marcus more closely during his work routine. She watched him interact with various personnel, noting his professional demeanor and the respect with which he treated everyone he encountered. She also noticed subtle signs that suggested military bearing. His posture, his precision in completing tasks, the way he seemed to assess situations with the eye of someone trained in security. Her curiosity finally got the better of her, and she decided to review Marcus's personnel file more thoroughly than she had when he was first hired. What she found surprised her. His background check had been extensive, far more thorough than what was typically required for custodial positions. His references included several high-ranking military officers, and his security clearance was at a level usually reserved for personnel with access to sensitive information. Most intriguingly, his file contained a note stating that his hiring had been personally approved by Admiral James Peterson, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command. Personal approval from an admiral for a custodial position was virtually unheard of, suggesting that there was much more to Marcus Thompson's story than appeared on the surface. Mitchell's investigation took on new urgency. She reached out to Admiral Peterson's office, requesting a brief meeting to discuss personnel matters. When she was granted an appointment, she prepared her questions carefully, knowing that she was entering sensitive territory. Admiral Peterson was a legend in the special operations community, a man who had overseen some of the most critical missions of the past 2 decades. When Mitchell entered his office, she found him reviewing operational reports, his desk covered with the kind of classified documents that shaped national security policy. "Commander Mitchell," Peterson said, looking up from his papers, "I understand you have questions about one of your building maintenance personnel." "Yes, sir." "Marcus Thompson. I've noticed some unusual patterns in his interactions with our operators, and his personnel file raises some questions." Peterson leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Marcus is performing his duties satisfactorily, I assume?" "More than satisfactorily, sir. But I'm curious about the circumstances of his hiring and the level of his security clearance." The Admiral was quiet for a moment, studying Mitchell with the same intensity she had seen him bring to mission briefings. "What you're really asking, Commander, is whether Marcus Thompson is who he appears to be." "Yes, sir." Peterson stood and walked to a wall display that honored Medal of Honor recipients from the special operations community. He stopped in front of one particular citation, reading it silently before turning back to Mitchell. "Marcus Thompson served with distinction for 32 years, Peterson said finally. "Master Chief Special Warfare Operator, multiple deployments, commendations that would fill a filing cabinet. He was one of the finest operators I ever had the privilege to serve alongside." Mitchell felt her suspicions confirmed, but also felt a new set of questions arising. Why isn't that information in his file? Why is he working as a custodian instead of in an official training or advisory capacity? "Because that's what he wanted," Peterson replied. "When Marcus retired, he could have taken any number of high-profile positions. Consulting firms were offering him enormous salaries, defense contractors wanted his expertise, military academies wanted him as an instructor. He turned them all down. Why?" Peterson returned to his desk, picking up a framed photograph that showed him with a group of operators in desert camouflage. Marcus was among them, though much younger and wearing the insignia of his rank and unit. 32 years of sending young men into harm's way takes a toll, Peterson explained. Marcus had reached a point where he wanted to continue serving, but without the burden of command responsibility. He asked for a position that would keep him close to operators without putting him in a position where his decisions could cost lives. Mitchell began to understand the genius of the arrangement. "So you created a position that would allow him to mentor informally." "I created a position that honored his service while giving him what he needed for his own peace of mind," Peterson corrected. "The mentoring was his own initiative, though I can't say I'm surprised by it. Marcus never could resist helping a struggling operator. Is there anything I should know about his methods or his influence on my team?" Peterson smiled more broadly now. "Your team's performance ratings have improved significantly over the past year. Confidence issues are down, training scores are up, and you haven't had a single operator wash out due to psychological stress in months. I'd say his influence has been entirely positive." Mitchell had to admit that the Admiral was right. The improvements in her team's performance had been remarkable, and now she understood why. "Should I acknowledge what I know? Should I treat him differently?" "Absolutely not," Peterson said firmly. "Marcus chose his current role because it allows him to help without the formal recognition or pressure that comes with official positions. If you start treating him like the senior operator he is, you'll destroy the very thing that makes his approach effective. So I just pretend I don't know. You treat him with the respect you would show any dedicated member of your team," Peterson replied. "You appreciate the positive impact he's having on your operators. And you trust that his decades of experience have taught him how to help people in ways that formal training programs sometimes can't. Mitchell left the Admiral's office with a new perspective on the quiet custodian who had been working in her building. She understood now that she was witnessing something special, a master craftsman who had found a way to continue practicing his art without the burden of official responsibility. Marcus wasn't just cleaning floors. He was continuing a career's worth of developing and supporting elite warriors. Over the following weeks, Mitchell observed Marcus with new eyes. She watched him work, noting the subtle ways he identified operators who were struggling and the careful approach he used to offer guidance. She saw him provide encouragement to nervous recruits, tactical insights to experienced operators, and emotional support to anyone who needed it. Most importantly, she saw the results of his efforts. Her team was becoming stronger, more confident, and more cohesive. The informal mentorship network that had grown up around Marcus was creating bonds between operators that extended far beyond their official training relationships. Veterans were helping newcomers, experienced operators were sharing wisdom with their peers, and the entire culture of the unit was becoming more supportive and resilient. Mitchell realized that Marcus had accomplished something remarkable. He had created a system for developing not just technical skills, but the kind of mental toughness and emotional intelligence that separated good operators from great ones, and he had done it all while officially holding the position of building custodian, invisible to most of the people he was helping. 6 months after Jake's first encounter with Marcus, the young SEAL had become one of the most respected operators in his unit. His transformation from uncertain rookie to confident team member had been remarkable, and his success had not gone unnoticed by senior leadership. When his team was selected for a high-priority deployment to Afghanistan, Jake was chosen as the assistant team leader, a position rarely given to someone with his limited experience. The deployment briefing was held in the same building where Marcus worked, in a secure conference room that the custodian cleaned every evening. As Jake sat through the mission overview, learning about the complex operation they would be undertaking, he found himself thinking about the man who had helped him develop the confidence to handle this level of responsibility. The mission involved tracking down a high-value target in a remote region of Afghanistan, a terrorist leader whose capture could significantly disrupt enemy operations in the region. It was exactly the kind of complex, dangerous assignment that had once filled Jake with paralyzing doubt. Now, as he listened to the briefing and studied the operational plans, he felt the calm confidence that Marcus had helped him develop. After the briefing, Jake sought out Marcus in the building. He found the older man in the supply room, organizing cleaning equipment with the same methodical precision he brought to everything he did. "We're shipping out tomorrow," Jake said, without preamble. Marcus looked up from his work, and Jake could see the shift in his expression. For just a moment, the mask of the humble custodian slipped, revealing the concerned mentor underneath. "Afghanistan?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Can't give details, but it's the kind of mission you'd understand." Marcus nodded slowly. In his years of service, he had prepared for countless similar deployments, had felt the same mixture of anticipation and concern that was radiating from Jake now. "How are you feeling about it?" Marcus asked. "Nervous, but good nervous," Jake replied. "Excited to put all the training to use. Confident in my team and my abilities. A lot different from how I would have felt 6 months ago." Marcus smiled with obvious pride. "That's exactly how you should feel. Nervous keeps you sharp, confidence keeps you effective. I wanted to thank you," Jake said, "before I left. For everything you've done, all the guidance you've given me. I wouldn't be ready for this without your help." "You would have figured it out eventually," Marcus replied. "I just helped you get there a little faster." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding the weight of what Jake was about to undertake. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had sent many young warriors into combat. "Remember what we talked about," he said. "Trust your training, trust your team, and trust yourself. You've earned your place on that team. Your leaders wouldn't have selected you if they didn't believe in your abilities. Any other advice?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Take care of your people. Watch out for the newer guys because someone needs to do for them what I tried to do for you. And remember that bringing everyone home is more important than any tactical objective." The wisdom was simple but profound. The kind of guidance that could only come from someone who had faced these decisions in real combat situations. Jake committed every word to memory. "I will," he promised. "And Jake," Marcus added, using his name for the first time in their relationship, "when you come back, there will be other young operators who need what you needed." The cycle continues, Jake understood. He was being inducted into the informal network of mentors that Marcus had created, expected to pass on the wisdom and support he had received to the next generation of struggling SEALs. The deployment went better than Jake could have imagined. His team successfully completed their mission, capturing the high-value target without casualties and gathering intelligence that would prove valuable for future operations. Throughout the 3-month deployment, Jake found himself drawing on Marcus's advice, especially when it came to supporting the newer members of his team. When Jake returned to San Diego, one of his first stops was to find Marcus and update him on the mission's success. He found the older man cleaning the same conference room where the mission had been briefed months earlier. "Welcome home," Marcus said, looking up from his work with a smile that conveyed genuine relief and pride. "Mission accomplished," Jake replied. "And everyone came home safe," Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's always the most important part." Jake spent the next hour telling Marcus about the deployment, describing the challenges they had faced and how he had applied the lessons he had learned during their conversations. Marcus listened with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what Jake had experienced, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his deep knowledge of combat operations. "There was one moment," Jake said, "when we had to adapt our plan on the fly. 6 months ago I would have hesitated, second-guessed myself, but I remembered what you said about trusting my training and my instincts. I made the call and it was the right one." "That's exactly what you were supposed to learn," Marcus replied. "Confidence in your abilities, trust in your preparation, and the courage to act when action is required." Jake looked around the conference room, thinking about all the briefings that had taken place there, all the missions that had been planned within these walls. "You know, there's something I've been wondering about. You've helped me and a lot of other operators, but who helped you when you were starting out?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression becoming thoughtful. "There was a Master Chief named Rodriguez when I was a young SEAL. Different Rodriguez from the kid you've been helping," he added with a smile. "This guy was old school, tough as nails, but he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself." "What did he teach you?" "Same things I've tried to teach you. But more than that, he taught me that part of being a leader is developing other leaders. He used to say that your legacy isn't measured by your own accomplishments, but by the accomplishments of the people you help along the way." Jake understood now that he was part of a chain that stretched back generations, a tradition of mentorship that had helped shape countless warriors. "Is that why you stayed involved after you retired?" "To continue that legacy? Among other reasons," Marcus replied. "The skills and experience I developed over 32 years don't just disappear when I take off the uniform. Finding ways to share that knowledge, to help the next generation, it gives meaning to everything I went through." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rodriguez, the young SEAL who Jake had helped connect with Marcus months earlier. Rodriguez looked confident and purposeful, a dramatic change from the anxious operator Jake remembered. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez said, nodding respectfully to Marcus. "Jake, good to see you back. How's he doing?" Jake asked Marcus, though the answer was obvious from Rodriguez's demeanor. "Ready for his first deployment," Marcus replied. "Leaves next week." Jake felt a surge of pride, both for Rodriguez's progress and for his own role in connecting the young SEAL with Marcus's guidance. The cycle was continuing, just as Marcus had said it would. "Rodriguez," Jake said, "when you get back, there will be others who need what you needed. Remember that." Rodriguez nodded seriously, understanding that he was being welcomed into something larger than himself. "I will." As Jake watched the interaction between Marcus and Rodriguez, he realized that he was witnessing something truly special. In a world where official recognition and formal positions often define success, Marcus had created something more valuable, a system for developing character, confidence and wisdom that would outlast any individual career or assignment. The impact of Marcus's work would ripple through generations of operators, each one passing on what they had learned to the next group of struggling young warriors. It was a legacy built not on headlines or decorations, but on the quiet transformation of individual lives and the strengthening of the brotherhood that bound all special operators together. 2 years had passed since Jake's first conversation with Marcus, and the Naval Special Warfare Command building had become something more than just a workplace. It had evolved into a unique training ground where technical skills were developed in classrooms and on ranges, but where wisdom and character were forged through informal conversations with a man who officially held the title of Custodian. Marcus continued his daily routine, maintaining the building with the same meticulous care he had always shown. But his real work had grown far beyond mopping floors and cleaning windows. He had become the unofficial mentor to dozens of operators, the steady presence who helped struggling SEALs find their confidence and guided successful ones toward leadership. The network of current and former mentees had spread throughout the special operations community. Officers who had once sought Marcus's guidance now held positions of authority in units around the world. Enlisted operators who had benefited from his wisdom were training the next generation of warriors. The impact of his quiet influence was multiplying exponentially. Jake had been promoted to team leader and was now one of the most respected young officers in his unit. More importantly, he had become skilled at identifying operators who needed guidance and connecting them with Marcus. The informal mentorship system had grown into something resembling a well-oiled machine, though it operated entirely outside official channels. One morning, Jake was reviewing mission reports in his office when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Admiral Peterson's office, which was unusual enough to get Jake's immediate attention. "Lieutenant Morrison," Peterson's aide said. "The Admiral would like to see you in his office at 1400 hours. Jake spent the rest of the morning wondering what could require the personal attention of Naval Special Warfare Command's highest-ranking officer. He reviewed his recent performance, his team's operations, and any decisions that might have attracted unwanted attention. When 1400 hours arrived, he presented himself at Peterson's office with considerable anxiety. "Lieutenant Morrison," Peterson said, gesturing for Jake to take a seat. "I've been hearing interesting things about you, sir. Your performance ratings are exceptional. Your team's morale is the highest in the command, and you have a reputation for developing junior operators that's unusual for someone of your rank and experience." Jake wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you, sir. I've been fortunate to have good mentors." Peterson smiled knowingly. "Yes, I imagine you have. Tell me, how well do you know Marcus Thompson?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow. Had Marcus's activities been discovered? Was Jake in trouble for his involvement in the informal mentorship network? He decided to answer honestly. "Very well, sir. He's been instrumental in my development as an operator and as a leader." "And you've helped facilitate his relationships with other struggling operators?" "Yes, sir. I believe his guidance has been invaluable to many members of our community." Peterson leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with the same intensity Jake had seen him bring to operational briefings. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, Lieutenant. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir. Marcus Thompson is dying." The words hit Jake harder than any physical blow he had ever received. He felt the air leave his lungs and had to grip the arms of his chair to steady himself. "Sir, pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. He's been fighting it for 6 months, but the doctors say he has maybe 3 more months left." Jake struggled to process the information. Marcus had shown no signs of illness, had continued his work with the same energy and dedication he had always displayed. "Does he know that I know?" "He doesn't know that anyone knows," Peterson replied. "He's been incredibly discreet about his medical situation. The only reason I found out is because his security clearance requires periodic medical reviews." "Why are you telling me this?" Peterson stood and walked to the window that overlooked the training facilities, where Marcus often spent his lunch breaks watching young operators develop their skills. "Because Marcus Thompson has done more for this command than any official instructor or counselor we've ever had," Peterson said. "His informal mentorship has transformed dozens of careers, prevented countless washouts, and created a culture of mutual support that strengthens every unit he touches." Jake waited for Peterson to continue, sensing that the Admiral was building toward something important. "What Marcus has created needs to survive him," Peterson said finally. "The knowledge he possesses, the approach he's developed, the network of mentors he's built. It can't die with him." "What are you asking me to do, sir?" Peterson returned to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "I'm asking you to help me document what Marcus has accomplished, to interview him, record his methods, identify the key principles that make his approach so effective. I want to create a training program that captures his wisdom and ensures it continues to benefit future generations of operators. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Peterson was proposing. Sir, Marcus chose his current role specifically because it operates outside official channels. He might not be willing to formalize his methods. That's why I need your help, Peterson replied. You have his trust. You understand his approach. You've seen firsthand how effective his methods can be. Jake thought about all the operators who had benefited from Marcus's guidance, all the careers that had been saved by his wisdom, all the lives that had been improved by his patient mentoring. The idea that this knowledge might be lost was unacceptable. How do we begin? Peterson smiled with obvious relief. Carefully, Marcus needs to believe that he's helping to develop a training program, not creating his own memorial. We present it as an opportunity to ensure that his insights become part of official doctrine. Over the following weeks, Jake began spending even more time with Marcus, but with a new purpose. Under the guise of helping to develop new training materials, he engaged the older man in detailed conversations about his mentoring philosophy, his methods for identifying struggling operators, and his techniques for building confidence and resilience. Marcus was initially suspicious of the sudden interest in formalizing his approach, but Jake was skillful in presenting the project as a way to help more operators than Marcus could reach individually. Gradually, the older man began to open up about his methods, sharing insights that he had developed over decades of working with elite warriors. The interviews revealed the depth of Marcus's understanding of human psychology and leadership development. His approach wasn't just intuitive, it was based on carefully observed patterns of behavior, precisely calibrated interventions, and a sophisticated understanding of what motivated different types of personalities. The key, Marcus explained during one session, is recognizing that every operator's path to confidence is different. Some need encouragement, others need challenge. Some need technical guidance, others need emotional support. The art is in reading people accurately and giving them exactly what they need. Jake documented everything: Marcus's techniques for initial assessment, his methods for building trust, his strategies for providing guidance without seeming to lecture, and his approach to creating networks of peer support among operators. As the weeks passed, Jake could see subtle signs of Marcus's illness beginning to show. The older man moved a bit more slowly, tired more easily, and occasionally showed flashes of discomfort that he tried to hide. But his dedication to the project never wavered, and his passion for helping others remained as strong as ever. The training program that emerged from their collaboration was comprehensive and powerful. It captured not just Marcus's methods but the spirit behind them. It provided a framework for developing the kind of informal mentorship networks that had proven so effective, while maintaining the personal touch that made Marcus's approach so successful. When the program was complete, Peterson called Jake back to his office for a final meeting. "This is extraordinary work," Peterson said, reviewing the training materials. "We now have a way to institutionalize Marcus's wisdom without losing its personal nature." "What happens next?" Jake asked. "We implement it gradually, starting with selected units and carefully monitoring the results. If it works as well as I expect it will, it becomes part of standard leadership development for all special operations personnel." Jake felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that Marcus's legacy would continue long after the man himself was gone. The knowledge and wisdom that had transformed so many careers would now be available to future generations of warriors. "There's one more thing," Peterson said. "When the time comes, I want you to be the one to tell Marcus what we've accomplished. He deserves to know that his life's work will continue." Jake nodded, understanding the honor and responsibility that Peterson was placing on him. Marcus Thompson would leave behind more than just memories. He would leave behind a living system for developing the character and confidence of America's elite warriors. The Custodian's secret would become his greatest legacy,